The paper slid across the table toward me, without a sound. Not pushed. Not offered. Just placed there, like something inevitable. Go ahead, Cameron said, folding his hands. It's standard. I didn't touch it. I looked at the paper, then at the people in the room. Cameron at the head of the table, too young for the confidence he wore. Logan beside him, eyes fixed on his laptop like it might rescue him. HR Maya, angled slightly away from me, already halfway out of the moment. No one met my eyes. How long do I have? I asked. Cameron smiled, thin and rehearsed. We'd prefer to resolve this today. Resolve. Like a dispute. Like I hadn't given this company 21 years of my life. I leaned back in the chair and felt something inside me go very still. Before I read anything, I said, I want to be clear. Is this a resignation, or are you terminating me? Logan's fingers paused over the keyboard. Cameron's smile didn't move. We're giving you an opportunity. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I understood. This was how it was going to be. And they had no idea what they'd just started. 21 years earlier, I'd walked into Holloway Systems with a borrowed blazer and a resume that still smelled like printer ink. I was 26, newly married, and terrified of screwing up a job I needed more than I wanted. I started as a junior operations analyst making $42,000 a year, sharing a cubicle near the copier that jammed every afternoon at 3. Back then, the company fit on 2 floors of a brick building in Aurora. Everyone knew everyone. When the servers went down, we ordered pizza and slept on the floor. When a client threatened to walk, we stayed late and figured it out. I learned how the company breathed, where it was strong, where it lied to itself. I stayed when others left. I took the jobs no one wanted. International rollouts, broken contracts, failing vendors. I learned how to fix things quietly, how to keep executives out of trouble without making them feel small. By my 10th year, people stopped asking if I could handle something and started assuming I already was. By my 15th, I was running global operations. By my 20th, I knew things no one else did. Why a South American partner still trusted us. Which European client would bolt if a single invoice went wrong. Where the bodies were buried, not the dramatic kind, just the everyday corporate sins that accumulate when a company survives long enough. I wasn't flashy. I didn't keynote conferences. I didn't post leadership quotes on LinkedIn. I showed up. I remembered names. Answer calls at odd hours. I made sure the machine kept running. That used to matter. Then Dominion Capital bought us. They flew in on a Monday morning in February, all matching coats and confident smiles, and told us nothing would fundamentally change. That's always how it starts. The new CEO, Cameron Wells, stood on the auditorium stage with a clicker in his hand and a voice that had learned confidence somewhere expensive. 35 years old. Perfect teeth. A resume that read like a series of exits that weren't exits if you looked too closely. We're here to invest, he said. To streamline. To unlock potential. People clapped because that's what you do when the person holding your future asks you to. I watched from the back row. I didn't clap. Not because I was cynical. Because I'd been through this before. Twice in smaller ways. Acquisitions always came with promises. And promises always came with a clock. The first changes were subtle. Meetings shifted. Calendars filled, then emptied. I'd be invited to a strategy session, then removed without explanation. My direct report started CCing Cameron instead of me. A junior manager, 24, fresh out of business school, was suddenly owning a process I designed from scratch. At first, I assumed it was transitional noise. New leadership finding their footing. I told myself to be patient. Then one morning, I walked into a meeting I'd helped schedule and realized my chair was gone. Not moved.
Gone.
I stood there for a moment, holding my notebook, while Cameron talked through a slide deck I'd never seen. No one acknowledged me. Not overtly. Just a collective decision not to notice. I took a seat against the wall. Afterward, I asked Maya from HR if there'd been a mistake. She smiled the way people do when they don't want to answer a question. We're still aligning roles. Aligning. Another word that meant nothing. The layoffs started 3 weeks later. They called it organizational realignment, which sounded almost benign if you didn't notice the pattern. Everyone let go was over 40. Everyone had tenure. Everyone made more than $130,000 a year. 15 people. Gone in a single morning. I wasn't one of them. Not yet. I started documenting things without fully admitting to myself why. Calendar changes. Emails where my name was quietly removed. Decisions made without me, then blamed on me when they went wrong. I saved everything to a personal drive at night, telling myself it was just good practice. One afternoon, Logan stopped me in the hallway. "We're trying to simplify decision paths," he said, not unkindly. "You've got a lot of historical involvement." Historical. Like I was a museum piece. "I built half of those paths," I said. He nodded. "Exactly." That was the moment I understood I wasn't being sidelined because I was unnecessary. I was being sidelined because I was expensive. Because I remembered how things used to be done. Because I could tell when they were about to make a mistake. And they didn't want that. The formal offer came in June. Cameron asked me to step into his office. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, the faint smell of something citrus and clean. He gestured for me to sit and spoke for a while about vision and agility and future-proofing. I let him finish. "We're creating a new role," he said finally. "Operations advisor." I waited. "It's more focused," he continued. "Less day-to-day. Strategic." "And the compensation?" I asked. He slid a sheet of paper across the desk. $98,000. I stared at it, then looked up. "That's a 50% pay cut," I said. Cameron spread his hands. "It reflects the scope. The scope you just reduced." He didn't answer that. "I'll need time to consider," I said. He smiled again. "Of course. But we are moving quickly." I walked back to my office, closed the door, and sat down without turning on the light. I felt something then, not anger, not fear. Grief. Not for the job. For the lie I'd believed. That loyalty accumulated interest. That if you stayed long enough, built enough, you earned safety. I called my husband that night and told him I thought they were trying to push me out. He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm not making it easy." By August, the pressure had become overt. My access to certain systems was revoked, temporarily. My team was reassigned for efficiency. When I asked for clarification, I was told decisions had already been made. Then came the meeting. The one with the paper. Cameron's office again. Logan.
Maya. No agenda.
That's when the resignation letter appeared on the table, like a trap you only see once you're already in it. Which brings us back to the present. To the silence. To Cameron waiting for me to sign my own erasure. I picked up the paper at last and skimmed it. One page. Clean language. Voluntary resignation. Waiver of claims. A neat ending for them. I set it back down.
"I'm not signing this," I said.
Maya shifted in her seat. Logan cleared his throat. Cameron's smile hardened. "If you choose not to resign, we'll have to consider other options." "Like termination?" I said. "Yes." "Without cause." He hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Enough." "I'll need that in writing," I said. The room changed then. Not dramatically. Just enough. The balance tipped. They'd expected resistance, maybe emotion. They hadn't expected precision. "I'll submit my own letter," I continued. "Effective upon settlement of all outstanding compensation, benefits, and contractual obligations." Logan looked up sharply. "That's not how this works," Cameron said. "It is," I said calmly. "If you read my contract." Silence stretched. Not awkward. Calculating. This wasn't over. Not even close. And if you're still listening, stay with me. Because the next part, the part where they realize they can't just make someone disappear, that's where everything changes. I leaned back in the chair and let the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel it, not me. My pulse was steady, my mind sharp. This wasn't anger. This wasn't fear. This was clarity. 21 years, and I wasn't going to be erased in a single meeting. Cameron's smile wavered slightly. Logan's fingers twitched over the laptop. Maya cleared her throat, as if that could restore the balance. It didn't. I could see it, the first flicker of doubt passing across their faces. They had expected me to panic, expected my ego to crumble, expected compliance. And I hadn't delivered. Very well, Cameron said finally. We'll review your proposal. But I warn you, this isn't standard procedure. I didn't flinch. I understand. That's why it's important it's documented. They exchanged a glance, one I didn't need to decode. The shift had begun. I walked out of the office without another word, the paper still in my hand. Outside, the hallways smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled air. The corporate world always smells the same, doesn't it? Clean, neutral, designed not to offend, not to comfort. I went to my office, sat down, and stared at my laptop. Emails poured in. Meeting invites. Vendor questions. Status reports I no longer owned. The usual chaos. Only now it was mine in a different way, observed, noted, recorded. I spent the rest of the afternoon systematically documenting every interaction. Every email, every Slack message, every phone call. Not obsessively. Not compulsively.
Strategically.
This was evidence. This was armor. My insurance against disappearing quietly. And then it hit me. They would call the next day. Probably the day after. Their lawyers would call. They always did. Every corporation like this had its team ready to enforce compliance. To coerce. To remind you who held the power. I sat there and smiled quietly to myself. Let them call. Let them think they had leverage. I had learned long ago that leverage was ephemeral. Preparedness was permanent. The weeks that followed blurred in a careful rhythm of professional survival. I arrived at the office, performed all tasks expected of me, and observed the subtleties of my displacement. A junior manager asked me a question I had answered hundreds of times. I answered succinctly. No instruction. No indulgence. Emails I should have been leading I was now CC'd on last. Vendor calls were rerouted. Presentations I had crafted for years were now delivered by someone else. I took mental notes and wrote them down later. Alone in my apartment, the city lights spilling across my desk. Every action mattered. Every slight mattered. Their mistakes would be my leverage later. I spoke to my assistant, Laura, in hushed tones one afternoon. Do you see it too? I asked. She had been with me for 8 years, sharp, observant. She nodded, her eyes dark with unease. It's systematic, she whispered. It's not personal, but it's deliberate. Yes, I said. It's corporate erasure. And it was. Each subtle slight, each meeting exclusion, each reassignment, each removed responsibility, it was all designed to shrink me, to make me question whether I belonged here anymore. The thing they didn't know was that shrinking me only revealed the outlines of their own insecurity. By the end of June, the formal offer arrived. The new role, with a 50% pay cut, framed as a generous opportunity. I read it over and over. The numbers etched in my mind. $98,000 for a position I had designed and executed flawlessly for years. My jaw ached from holding back the words I wanted to say. The sting wasn't the cut itself. It was the assumption that I would accept it quietly. That 21 years of loyalty and results could be rewritten with a signature on a single page. I drafted a response and sent it to my attorney. This was no longer about pride. It was about principle, about power, about refusing to be erased in silence. The conditional resignation, crafted in one paragraph, became my weapon. A quiet, precise tool that would shift the balance if I wielded it correctly. The days leading to the ultimatum meeting felt suspended in tension. Every phone ring, every unexpected email, made my stomach tighten. I walked through the office as if moving through a minefield, each step measured. Every glance, every nod, every passive smile was a puzzle, a test, a gauge of how far they would push. And I learned to read it all. Because they would push. They always did. And they would call. And when they did, I would be ready. One Thursday, Logan stopped by my desk. Cameron wants to see you.
Now.
His voice was neutral, but I could hear the edge beneath the calm. I nodded once. Of course. He hesitated, then added, "It's about the offer." I didn't respond. My expression said it all. Ready. The conference room smelled faintly of ozone from the air purifier. Sunlight fell through the blinds, cutting lines across the polished wood. Cameron sat at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes calculating. Logan beside him, Maya across from him. I entered, paper in my hand. The resignation letter slid toward me, without a word. A clean, white rectangle with fine, neat text, designed to end me quietly, irrevocably.
Iset.
They waited. The silence stretched long enough for the tension to thrum like an unseen current. I leaned forward, picked up the paper.
Scanned it.
Signature line at the bottom. Terms. Waivers. Voluntary resignation. I set it down. Looked up.
I'm not signing this, I said.
Simple. Firm. Maya shifted. Logan's fingers hovered over the laptop. Cameron's smile thinned. The shift had begun. You understand the consequences? Cameron asked. Polite. Carefully measured. Yes, I said. I understand perfectly. That's why I'm submitting my own letter. I reached into my folder.
Pulled out a single sheet.
One paragraph. Conditional resignation. Effective only upon full settlement of salary, bonuses, stock, severance, and accrued benefits. I slid it across the table. They froze. The air in the room tightened. This isn't standard, Cameron said slowly. It is, I replied. If you read the contract. I stood, collected my coat, left the room. Silence behind me, but a quiet victory had settled like stone in my chest. That night, at home, I poured a glass of water and sat on the edge of my bed. The city lights reflected on the window pane, fractured like my thoughts. I ran through everything. My career, the slight pauses, the way meetings had been manipulated, the offer, the paper. Everything was documented. Every slight, every action. My advantage wasn't ego. It was preparation. I called my attorney brief, clear. They know. They will call. I said. Prepare for contact. Yes, he replied. I'll be ready. And so began the waiting game. Weeks of subtle intimidation, of calls that went nowhere, of emails drafted and redrafted. Each day I arrived at the office and moved through the motions, performing the work expected of me while observing, recording, calculating. Every action mattered. Every slight mattered. Their mistakes would become leverage. Their overconfidence my weapon. By mid-July, the first lawyer call came. Formal, polite, practiced. They asked for a meeting. Tried to pressure me into accepting terms that weren't my own. I responded calmly, legally, deliberately. Each call ended with the same phrase. We'll be in touch. I smiled quietly each time. Let them call. Let them think they had the upper hand. They didn't. At night, I updated my log. Meeting times. Emails.
Notes.
Observations. Patterns. Everything would be necessary. One misstep on their side, one acknowledgement of mismanagement or coercion, and my conditional resignation would become the strongest leverage I'd ever wielded. And they had no idea. The tension escalated silently. Each week, a new sign. Access restored to systems taken away for efficiency, a junior employee reassigned without explanation, vendors being nudged back to me quietly.
They tested me.
They pushed. And I stood ready. I poured a second glass of water, leaned back, and whispered to myself, they don't know yet. They will. I walked into the office Monday morning and noticed immediately that the rhythm had changed. It wasn't dramatic, no alarms or announcements, just gaps. My calendar showed meetings I hadn't scheduled, some canceled, some I was only tangentially included in. The team I had built over 2 decades looked at me differently now, curious, uncertain, some cautious, some eager to prove themselves to the new management. Laura, my assistant, met me at the door. Her expression was careful, measured. They've reassigned the European accounts, she said quietly, almost as if admitting a secret. All communications routed through Cameron now. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. My voice was calm, but my mind was already cataloging everything. This wasn't incompetence. It wasn't oversight. This was deliberate, systematic, a calculated shrinking of my authority, step by step, under the guise of streamlining. The first meeting that day was meant to review quarterly forecasts. Normally, I would lead, prepare the slides, outline risks, predict pitfalls. Today, I was in the back row, muted on the call, watching someone half my age confidently outline numbers I had meticulously verified. My contributions were referenced in passing, nothing more. I typed notes in silence, documenting every misstatement, every minor error, every oversight. This would be useful later. After the meeting, I received an email from Cameron. Please attend the strategy session at 2 p.m. Your input is optional. Optional. The first time in 21 years I had ever been given the choice of whether my expertise mattered. I printed the email and filed it. This was the pattern, the slow erosion of presence. Lunch was quiet. I sat at my desk, eating a sandwich I barely tasted, reviewing the internal memo I'd been excluded from. A minor change in reporting lines had been approved without my knowledge. It was nothing catastrophic on its own, but in the context, it was a signal. I knew that the next round of role adjustments would follow similar lines. They were testing me, measuring my reaction, seeing how far they could push without resistance. Laura came by with a stack of papers. I think they expect you to sign something today, she said softly. HR hinted. I looked at her. She wasn't scared of me. She was cautious, protective, but worried. I smiled faintly. Not today, I said. But thank you. The afternoon brought the first direct challenge. A young analyst, fresh from a consulting program, approached me with questions I had answered 1,000 times. I provided the answers, precise and complete, but offered no advice.
No coaching. No encouragement.
This was not humiliation. It was documentation. Let them overplay their hand. Let them believe I was disengaged. By Thursday, it escalated. Access to certain internal systems was suddenly restricted for maintenance. My team was reassigned, under the pretense of cross-training. An important client call was scheduled without me, and the call report was sent with my name CC'd last, a minor insult magnified by experience. I made a note of it, every detail logged with timestamps. These were small things, almost invisible, but they accumulated like tiny cuts. And cuts over time bleed. The first confrontation came in a quiet hallway, away from cameras and conference rooms. Logan stopped me. Rachel, we're reorganizing your responsibilities. Some tasks will be reassigned temporarily. He avoided eye contact, but his tone carried an unspoken warning. This is final. I nodded. Understood. Please send the details in writing. My voice was neutral, but my mind was cataloging every word, every hesitation. This wasn't casual, this was strategy. I needed proof, not emotion. Logan hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Later that day, I found a memo in my inbox. Effective immediately, certain accounts and reporting duties will be managed by other team members. Please adjust accordingly. It was signed by HR, clean, concise, bureaucratic. The perfect weapon to make a senior professional feel invisible. I walked past the office window on the way to a meeting. Through the glass, I saw the new junior analyst, smiling, confident, rehearsed in authority he hadn't earned. I didn't look away, didn't flinch. I watched, learned, recorded. The balance of power had shifted, but the game wasn't over. It was only beginning. That evening, I returned home, exhausted but focused. I opened my notebook, reviewed every email, every conversation, every exclusion. Each was a brick in a wall they were building around me, and I was gathering mortar to hold it together. I made lists. I noted reactions. I planned contingencies. This was not paranoia, it was preparation. The next morning, an unexpected email appeared. Mandatory strategy alignment meeting. Attendance required. Agenda attached. The attachment was a 6-page document detailing a process I had designed from scratch, now presented as a collective improvement. My name appeared as a contributor, but only in fine print, nearly invisible. I read through it. No changes in content. No acknowledgement of oversight. Only erasure. I saved the document. Printed a copy. Labeled it, timestamped it. Evidence never sleeps. At lunch, I met with Laura. They're accelerating the reassignment, she said. Europe, APAC, even some domestic accounts. It's all going elsewhere.
She paused.
You'll notice it soon. I've noticed, I said. I always notice. My calmness surprised her. Good, she whispered, as if relief and fear could coexist. 2 days later, the first formal attempt to force compliance arrived. A junior HR associate, barely in her 3rd year, was sent to discuss career opportunities. I listened as she presented the pay cut, the title adjustment, and the streamlined responsibilities. She was polite, professional, entirely unaware of the tectonic weight behind my eyes. I let her finish. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Is this optional? She blinked. Well, it's presented as an opportunity. I nodded. That was confirmation enough. The escalation continued over the following weeks. Meetings from which I had been the primary driver, now, went without me. Presentations I had built were delivered under someone else's name. A vendor call went poorly because the new lead didn't understand the nuances I had embedded. Errors that were minor but visible were documented by my team. I watched and noted. This wasn't revenge. This was leverage. I needed them to push too far. One Friday afternoon, the formal letter arrived. A neatly typed document, 1 paragraph, asking me to resign voluntarily. The phrasing was precise, almost gentle. To maintain continuity, we request your voluntary resignation effective immediately. This document confirms your understanding and agreement. I read it carefully. I set it aside. Did not react. Did not respond. Then, hours later, Logan appeared at my desk. You should consider this seriously, he said. It's best for everyone. I looked up. I've considered everything. I'll respond in writing when I am ready. His face betrayed the first flicker of irritation I had seen. You understand the consequences?
Ido.
He nodded, slowly. Walked away. The first power tremor had been noted, recorded, cataloged, and I smiled quietly to myself. Over the weekend, I drafted my conditional resignation. 1 paragraph. Effective only upon settlement of all salary, bonuses, stock options, severance, and accrued benefits. I reviewed the document multiple times with my attorney. Each word measured. Each clause airtight. Precision over passion. Calculated over reactive. My response would speak louder than any argument or meeting ever could. Monday morning, I walked into the conference room with that document in hand. Cameron, Logan, and Maya were waiting. The resignation letter had already been placed on the table. I set mine next to it. The silence stretched. I said nothing. Let them process it. Let the imbalance sink in. This was my weapon. Quiet. Infallible. Have you considered the offer? Fraser asked. There it was. The soft pressure, a polite nudge disguised as inquiry. I let another moment pass. My fingers rested on my notebook. I am reviewing my options, I said finally. Neutral.
Precise.
Non-committal. I will respond in writing. The lawyer paused, perhaps expecting frustration or a flinch. Neither came. Understood, he said. We look forward to your response.
Click.
The line went dead. I leaned back and made notes. Timing.
Tone.
Every word mattered. Every pause mattered. This was not personal, it was professional leverage. The days that followed became a quiet war. Each morning, I entered the office with deliberate calm, moving through the motions while observing the cracks forming around me. One morning, I discovered that a critical vendor had been redirected entirely through the junior analyst. I asked for clarification, and the response was vague, corporate, carefully neutral. We're streamlining processes. Streamlining. The euphemism of erasure. I made a note. This was not oversight. This was deliberate. At lunch, I reviewed emails from that morning. Invitations I had drafted months ago had been quietly canceled or reassigned. Notes I had sent to clients were now phrased under someone else's name. I noticed small errors creeping into reports. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing irreversible. Just small misalignments that made the system vulnerable. I documented each one. Each misstep was a breadcrumb toward leverage. Laura stopped by my desk again, concern in her eyes. "They've reassigned the Asia-Pacific accounts," she said softly. "It's accelerating." I nodded without emotion. "I've noticed," I said. "Keep me informed of any anomalies." She nodded and left, the faint click of her heels echoing down the hall. The office felt larger without her presence lingering. The absence of casual acknowledgement made every observation sharper. I placed my bag on the floor and set my documents neatly in front of me. One page, the pre-written resignation letter. Next to it, my conditional resignation, one paragraph, precise, deliberate. The weight of 21 years pressed down lightly in my chest, measured, restrained. I did not flinch. This was the moment I had been building toward, quietly, methodically, through weeks of careful observation, meticulous notes, and patient preparation. Cameron leaned forward, a small smile forming that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Mercer," he began, voice calm but controlled, "as you can see, we've prepared a resignation letter for your review. We believe this is the cleanest path for all parties involved." I picked up the paper. "Read it once, then set it down again." "I've reviewed it," I said evenly. "I am not signing this document." A faint shift in the room. Logan's drumming fingers froze mid-tap. Maya blinked once. Cameron's smile faltered, just enough for me to notice. "I see," he said. "May I ask why?" "Because it does not reflect the full scope of my entitlements," I said.
Calm.
Measured. Neutral. Not confrontational, but absolute. The table was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Cameron adjusted his tie. "You're aware that refusing to sign could result in immediate termination?" I nodded once. "I am aware." Maya made a note on her clipboard. Logan exhaled quietly, the first audible sign of human hesitation in the room. Cameron's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what would you propose, if I may ask?" I reached across the table and placed my conditional resignation in front of him. Only one paragraph. One sentence, effective only upon full settlement of salary, bonuses, stock options, severance, and accrued benefits. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I let it speak for itself. For a moment, no one moved. The silence became a force. Cameron read the paragraph twice, each time slower than the last. Logan leaned forward, reading over his shoulder. Maya's pen hovered above the paper, uncertain. "This isn't standard procedure," Cameron said carefully. "It's unusual." "Yes," I said evenly. "But it is legally sound and consistent with my contract." The first tremor passed across the table. I could see the ripple of calculation in Cameron's expression, the slightest crease of worry at the corner of his eyes. Logan's fingers flexed, subconsciously measuring the risk. Maya looked down, pen now still, the faintest tightness around her mouth. The balance had shifted, imperceptibly but irreversibly. I leaned back slightly, hands folded, breathing measured. I did not allow a single hint of triumph or fear. Control was silent. Power is quiet. Cameron cleared his throat. "And if we were to proceed with this? If we were to negotiate terms, what are your expectations?" I didn't answer immediately. I let him speak, filling space with assumptions, hoping I might give him a chance to overstep. And he did in subtle ways. "We could consider some adjustments. Partial severance, maybe bonus prorated. Stock options might be negotiable." I waited.
Long.
The quiet stretched. My gaze rested on the table. I had rehearsed this, anticipated this, mapped it in precise detail. "I will not accept partial measures," I said finally. "I am seeking full settlement of all contractual entitlements, no exceptions." Logan's shoulders shifted. Cameron's mouth pressed into a thin line. Maya's pen finally touched paper, but slower than usual, hesitant. The moment hung. It was heavy but clean. I had not raised my voice. I had not argued. I had placed the control back where it belonged. The rest of the day unfolded in careful increments. Calls from internal counsel, follow-up questions from HR, emails flagged with urgency. Each interaction recorded, documented, cataloged. Minor missteps emerged, a misstatement in a forwarded email, a failure to include a timestamp, a misallocated responsibility in a system access log. Each anomaly was noted. Every tiny fissure was leverage. By mid-afternoon, the first escalation email arrived from Cameron directly. We'd like to schedule a call to discuss next steps regarding your conditional resignation. Please advise availability. I read it carefully, logged the timestamp, forwarded it to my attorney with a brief note. Available. Strategy pending. That was all.
No emotion.
No signal of anxiety or anticipation. Every word, every pause, every detail was intentional. 2 days later, the formal negotiation call occurred.
Speakerphone. Cameron.
Logan. Michael Fraser. Myself. Ms. Mercer, Fraser began, we understand you've submitted a conditional resignation. We'd like to clarify a few points. Clarify, I said softly. Or negotiate? Silence. Then Cameron's voice smooth. Negotiate. We want to resolve this amicably. Amicably, I repeated. Meaning? Another pause. Fraser spoke. We're prepared to offer a settlement of $950,000. I leaned forward, voice calm. That does not reflect the total of salary, bonuses, stock options, or accrued benefits. It is insufficient. There was a collective intake of breath across the line. Logan's fingers tightened on the table. Cameron coughed, clearing his throat. Fraser paused. Ms. Mercer, we believe this is generous. Generous, I said slowly, is not what the contract dictates. It is not what the law requires. It is not sufficient. The room went quiet for a long beat. Then Cameron said, You do realize we can escalate this legally?
I do, he replied evenly.
And that is why my conditional resignation is in place. I have documentation. I have counsel. I am prepared to enforce my rights. More silence. I could almost hear them recalculating, shifting strategy in real time. The first cracks had become visible. They realized that control was not theirs to wield unilaterally. The following week, every interaction became a tactical maneuver. A meeting here, an email there, a misstatement subtly pointed out during a vendor call. I was everywhere, but invisible. I exerted influence quietly, observing, documenting, collecting leverage. Every small mistake on their side became evidence, every hesitation a fissure in assumed authority. At home, I would open the notebook late at night, under the soft glow of the desk lamp. Pages filled with times, dates, quotes, nuances. A chessboard of minutiae. Each entry a piece of control. I allowed no self-pity, no dramatization. This was preparation, and preparation is power. The weeks passed in a rhythm of tension. Each lawyer call, each message from HR, each subtle realignment was cataloged. I stayed calm. I moved through the office with precision. Observed, noted, logged. Small gestures, reassignments, exclusions, tentative requests became ammunition. The corporate assumption that I would fold quietly was no longer valid. I had mapped the battlefield. I had measured the players. And they were already overextended. By the end of the month, Cameron requested an in-person meeting. Final discussion, the email read. Subtle, polite, but the weight was clear. The first power shift was ready to become a formal reckoning. I prepared meticulously. The conditional resignation would be deployed in person. The evidence carefully organized. The stakes precise. The power of 21 years distilled into a single paragraph of legal text. I arrived at the office that morning feeling the weight of anticipation, though I showed none. The lobby smelled faintly of new polish, air recycled and impersonal. I walked past the junior analysts, past the HR assistants, and up to the conference room. Cameron, Logan, Maya already waited, their expressions carefully neutral, but a tension lingered I could feel without seeing. The table was set, the papers in place. Silence held between us, taut as a wire. I placed my folder on the table, opened it, and slid the conditional resignation into the center, next to the pre-written document. Eyes flicked. Fingers hesitated. I leaned back, calm. Let them see the inevitability of the move. This, Cameron said slowly, is not typical. Yes, I said evenly. It is entirely consistent with my rights and my contract. Logan's jaw tightened. Maya's pen hovered above paper. The air shifted imperceptibly. They understood. The balance had changed. The game had shifted. And the moment was mine. The calls from their legal team began within the hour. Michael Fraser's voice again, polite, professional, attempting to negotiate. Offers floated. Partial severance, prorated bonuses, limited stock options. I responded clearly, calmly, legally, firmly. I will accept only what is due under the contract, I said. Every word measured. Every pause deliberate. Silence became leverage. For the next few days, emails, calls, subtle attempts at intimidation arrived. Each one cataloged. Each one responded to in measured detail. The table had shifted. The assumption of unilateral control was gone. And they were beginning to understand that their procedural power meant nothing against preparation, patience, and precision. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a pit I could see but they could not. Every email, every phone call, every tentative question from HR became part of a web I was quietly weaving. They tried to test me with subtle pressure, a misrouted report here, an ambiguous directive there, a junior analyst asking questions I had already answered. I answered all of them calmly, precisely, without hesitation, and I logged every interaction. My notes grew thick, pages filled with timestamps, observations, and minor errors committed by people who assumed authority over me. The accumulation of their mistakes became my leverage, and I smiled quietly to myself, knowing they had no idea how much power I now held. Then came a call from Fraser himself. The tone was polite, but the subtext was clear. We're escalating, and we want to measure your limits. Ms. Mercer, we would like to schedule a meeting to discuss settlement options further. Cameron and Logan will be present. We hope to reach a mutually agreeable resolution. I nodded silently to myself. Mutual agreement? Theirs, not mine. I replied in writing with precise availability and reminded them that all communications must be routed through my counsel. Every word measured, every pause, deliberate. I was no longer just reacting, I was orchestrating. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived early, letting the sterile office air fill my lungs, the faint smell of citrus and polished wood grounding me. I passed junior staff who offered polite nods. They did not yet understand the storm they were witnessing in slow motion. I entered the conference room to find Cameron, Logan, Maya, and Fraser already assembled. Cameron's posture was tight, practiced, his smile thinner than it had been the previous week. Logan's hands were folded, fingers tapping intermittently. Maya's pen hovered above her pad, as if waiting for a single misstep to record. Fraser watched me carefully, noting every small detail, every reaction, every moment of hesitation. There was none. I placed my folder on the table and opened it, exposing my conditional resignation next to the pre-written document. Cameron's eyes flicked, a micro-expression of recognition that he had underestimated me. Logan leaned forward slightly, the tension in his shoulders betraying his confidence. Maya's pen froze midair. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. This was no longer a simple negotiation. This was an examination of control, and I had reclaimed the narrative. Cameron spoke first, his tone controlled, but carrying a subtle edge. Ms. Mercer, as you are aware, this is unusual. The conditional resignation is not something we normally encounter. It introduces complexities that our legal team must consider. Yes, I said evenly. It introduces complexities because the situation requires it. It reflects my rights and my contract in full. Anything less would be insufficient. There was a brief, charged silence. Fraser cleared his throat and said, "We are prepared to discuss an initial settlement offer, $950,000. I let the words hang in the air. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I had rehearsed every response, every counter, every subtle inflection of voice that could assert authority without breaking composure. "That is insufficient," I said softly but firmly. "It does not account for my accrued salary, bonuses, stock options, or severance. I cannot and will not accept partial compliance." Cameron's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Logan's fingers flexed against the table. Maya lowered her pen. Fraser adjusted his tone. "Ms. Mercer, that is generous, considering the circumstances," he said. "Generous is not compliance," I said. "It is not legal entitlement. And it is not acceptable." For a moment, they all absorbed the reality. The unilateral control they assumed no longer existed. I was no longer simply an employee. I was a prepared, documented, and unyielding presence whose knowledge, history, and precise execution gave me leverage. They realized the balance of power had shifted, and the weight of that realization hung in the room like a storm cloud. Over the next week, negotiations became a careful dance of pressure and response. Emails arrived flagged urgent. Phone calls were scheduled and rescheduled. Each inquiry was met with methodical calm, and I logged every nuance, pauses, inflections, omitted words, implied threats. Each misstep they made was catalogued. Each concession they inadvertently made was recorded. My leverage was building silently, invisibly, but with certainty. Late one evening, I reviewed my documentation again at home, under the warm glow of my desk lamp. Timestamps, emails, calls, meeting notes, misstatements, misrouted responsibilities. Every small anomaly was recorded and cross-referenced. My attorney reviewed it with meticulous care. The legal foundation of my conditional resignation was absolute. The power I had quietly amassed was real, and the inevitable realization of that power on their side was approaching. The formal settlement discussions began the following Monday. Fraser led the call, speaking carefully. "Ms. Mercer, we recognize the validity of your position. We are prepared to offer a revised settlement." I listened. My pen hovered above my notebook. I let them fill the silence, let them assume dominance. The revised offer arrived, $1.2 million. Better than before, but still short of full contractual compliance. "Not acceptable," I said simply.
They paused.
Cameron cleared his throat. "We're prepared to discuss adjustments. What do you propose?" I outlined, clearly and firmly, the exact components: prorated salary through the resignation date, accrued vacation, expense reimbursements, performance bonus, stock options, and full severance. Every figure, every entitlement, meticulously documented and referenced in my contract. They took notes. The weight of my precision was palpable. The room's temperature seemed to shift. Logan exhaled, Cameron's posture stiffened, and Maya's pen scribbled faster than usual. Fraser's tone grew measured, careful. "Ms. Mercer, this is comprehensive. We'll need time to review internally." "Of course," I said. "I expect nothing less. And I will review any formal offer through my counsel before any agreement is executed." The tension that had been quietly building for weeks now manifested as subtle panic on their side. Emails flew faster. Meetings were scheduled and canceled. Internal memos were circulated to analyze my position. The quiet calculation I had maintained was now mirrored by frantic recalculation across their offices. I spent the next few days maintaining my calm, following every detail, responding only through counsel, observing the subtle tremors in their communications. Every pressure tactic they applied was catalogued, every soft threat noted, every misstep leveraged. I had become a quiet storm, unseen but undeniable, and they were beginning to understand the cost of misjudging me. Finally, the settlement call arrived. The figures were now $1.75 million, including attorney's fees and all entitlements. The room on the other end of the line was quiet, tense. I allowed only a faint pause before responding, confirming acceptance, contingent on formal execution. Silence followed. Then a single word from Fraser. Understood. I hung up. The storm had passed, but the landscape had changed irreversibly. Their procedural authority was diminished. My leverage, meticulously constructed over weeks, had been realized fully. I allowed myself a brief moment of relief, knowing that this culmination was the product of patience, precision, and calculated silence, not confrontation. At home, I set the final documents aside and opened my notebook. Notes from weeks of subtle observation, careful calculation, and tactical patience lay before me. Each entry represented not only a step toward justice, but a reaffirmation of the principle that preparation and meticulous documentation are the ultimate tools against coercion and overreach. The weight of the victory settled quietly. Not a triumph born of anger or revenge, but of measured, calculated, patient adherence to principle. The conditional resignation had been deployed flawlessly. The settlement had been secured on my terms. And the first true shift of power in this corporate battlefield had been realized. But the story was not yet over. The post-settlement world awaited, the ramifications for Cameron and Logan, the subtle reorganization of remaining staff, and the quiet whispers in the office corridors of what had just transpired. And for me, the next phase, reflection, preparation, and ensuring that the lessons of this experience were preserved, was only beginning. The morning of the formal settlement meeting, the office had an electric stillness. I arrived early, as always, letting the quiet soak in. My folder was under my arm, containing the final version of my conditional resignation, every document cross-referenced, every email logged, every tiny misstep from the past weeks cataloged. I had reviewed it one last time at home, my attorney's notes beside me. Precision was my weapon. Preparation was my shield. And now, the moment to wield both had come. I walked past the reception, nodding to the junior assistants who were too busy adjusting their hair or screens to notice the storm I carried. Up the elevator, the hum of movement and cables, the faint smell of polished wood and new electronics. I stepped into the conference room where Cameron, Logan, Maya, and Fraser were already waiting. Cameron's posture was stiff, his practiced smile thinner than before. Logan's hands fidgeted lightly on the table. Maya sat perfectly neutral, but there was a tension in her shoulders that wasn't there last week. I placed my folder on the table, opened it, and let the papers lie in front of them. My conditional resignation next to the pre-written document, every clause and demand precise and deliberate. Cameron leaned back slightly. "Ms. Mercer," he said, voice calm but with a slight tremor at the edges. "We've reviewed your conditions. We believe we can reach a resolution, but I must say, this is extraordinary." "Yes," I said evenly. "It is consistent with my contract and my legal rights. Anything less would be insufficient." Fraser spoke next, deliberately measured. "We are prepared to offer $1.2 million, including a prorated bonus and partial stock option vesting. This is our best offer." I let a beat pass. Measured, calm. "That is not sufficient," I said. "It does not reflect full salary, accrued benefits, or severance. I will only accept full contractual compliance." Logan's shoulders tensed. Cameron's fingers flexed on the table. Maya's pen hovered, her hand frozen in midair. The room seemed to shrink as the weight of my words settled. For weeks, they had assumed compliance. Now reality pressed down on them. The power they assumed was no longer theirs. Fraser's voice softened slightly, carefully navigating each word. "Ms. Mercer, we need to understand your exact requirements. Can you outline them?" I slid the summary across the table, each line precise, each figure accurate. Prorated salary through the resignation date, accrued vacation, expense reimbursements, 2025 performance bonus, full stock option vesting, severance, and benefits continuation. Every figure cross-checked, every entitlement aligned with my contract. Cameron glanced at Logan, and I could see the silent calculation passing between them. "This is comprehensive," Cameron said finally. "We will need time to review internally before we can agree." "Of course," I replied calmly. "Please confirm that any communication regarding this settlement be routed through my attorney. I will review and respond only in writing. Fraser cleared his throat. Understood. The room went quiet. The subtle tremor of panic under a veneer of professionalism was visible now. Fingers drumming, slight exhalations, small shifts in posture. They were recalculating, and I could watch it unfold. Over the next 3 days, the calls and emails came in. Every attempt at pressure, every implied threat, every subtle suggestion that they could delay or reduce the settlement was met with calm, measured, and legally precise responses through counsel. I allowed no emotional reaction. Every response strengthened my position. Their overconfidence began to crumble under the weight of meticulous documentation and unwavering assertion. By Friday, they called again. This time, Cameron sounded uncharacteristically tense. Ms. Mercer, we are prepared to finalize $1.75 million, inclusive of all entitlements, attorney fees, and bonuses. I paused. Let the words hang. Silence is leverage. I will review the final documentation with my attorney, I said finally. Assuming accuracy, I will execute the settlement. More silence. Then Fraser spoke, measured but carrying a subtle note of resignation. Understood. We'll send the documents immediately. That evening, I reviewed the settlement packet. Every figure matched my records. Every clause aligned with the conditional resignation. I signed. Forwarded it through counsel. The balance of power had officially shifted. They had assumed control, and now, formally, they were complying with the terms I had set. The next week at the office, subtle shifts were evident. Cameron avoided my office when possible. Logan walked by without making direct eye contact. Maya maintained her professional neutrality, but moved with a faint hesitation in my presence. Junior analysts now deferred, occasionally seeking guidance on matters they had previously approached with quiet confidence. The narrative was clear. The shift in power had been documented, executed, and observed by everyone. Yet the aftermath brought new tension. Staff whispered quietly in hallways, speculating on the storm that had just passed. Vendors called to confirm changes. Board members requested briefings. The organization was scrambling, internally aware that their handling of senior, experienced staff had been flawed. And I, quiet and steady, continued my work, operational oversight, mentoring, documentation, while observing the subtle consequences of weeks of miscalculation on their part. One afternoon, Laura approached my desk cautiously. "They're talking about you in the break room," she said softly. Not the office gossip kind, more like awe. "People can't believe you held your ground." I smiled faintly. "Let them speculate," I said. "All that matters is that the record is accurate and the work continues."
Control is quiet.
Power is measured. Evenings became my own sanctuary. I reviewed notes, emails, and documentation, ensuring every small detail was preserved. Each misstep, each hesitation, each micro-failure by Cameron, Logan, and HR was carefully archived. Not for revenge, but for protection. For clarity. For strategy. I had learned the lesson over decades. Leverage is strongest when silent, precise, and undeniable. A week later, the internal memo arrived. It read, in careful, corporate language, "All processes under Ms. Mercer's oversight will revert to her full authority effective immediately. Any previously reassigned responsibilities are rescinded." I leaned back in my chair. A quiet satisfaction settled in. The room had shifted. Control was restored. Authority recognized. And the slow, deliberate dismantling of assumed power had been catalogued in real time for anyone who wished to analyze the course of events. But the consequences extended beyond the immediate office. By Monday, whispers circulated in the broader company. Executives on other floors were uncertain how to handle senior staff. Cameron and Logan, both inexperienced in handling seasoned professionals in crisis, struggled with communication breakdowns and operational missteps. Minor errors became visible in external audits, internal reports flagged inconsistencies, and the board demanded explanations. The subtle chaos was measured, precise, and inevitable, all of it stemming from their miscalculation, their assumption that compliance was guaranteed. I continued to observe, record, and act only where necessary. Staff now sought guidance, vendors now deferred to me, and even the junior analysts who had replaced my responsibilities briefly began to recognize the depth of institutional knowledge I carried. Every action I took was deliberate, every decision measured. I had regained authority, but more than that, I had set a precedent. Compliance cannot be assumed, respect must be earned, and leverage must be recognized. By midweek, Cameron called a private meeting with me alone. The first time he had attempted direct engagement since the settlement. His tone was cautious, almost conciliatory. "Rachel, I want to acknowledge that your handling of the recent negotiations was impressive. We underestimated your position." I remained seated, hands folded on the table, expression neutral. "Thank you. I hope this establishes clarity for all future interactions." He nodded, hesitant. "Yes, it does. We want to move forward constructively. Then let's ensure expectations and roles are clearly defined and documented," I said. Silence again, measured, precise. The room, the office, the building, all felt different. Tension lingered, but now it was one of mutual understanding. They recognized my authority, my knowledge, and my meticulous preparation. I had turned the quiet sidelining, subtle exclusions, and intimidation into evidence, leverage, and ultimate compliance. Even after the settlement was executed, the effects rippled. Junior staff approached me cautiously but respectfully, seeking advice. Vendors recalibrated communications to ensure accuracy. Board members sent emails requesting updates I had long managed silently. And throughout it all, I maintained the same calm, measured approach. At home, I reviewed the final logs from the negotiation period. Every call, every email, every subtle shift in tone documented. I allowed myself a small smile. The victory was not dramatic. There were no fireworks.
No celebratory declarations.
But the full weight of weeks of preparation, patience, and precision was now evident. The table had shifted, the game was recalibrated, and I had won, not by aggression, but by strategy, silence, and meticulous observation. Yet the story was not over. There was more to come. How the company adapted, how staff reacted to the new equilibrium, and subtle long-term consequences for those who assumed power could be exercised without accountability. And more personally, what it meant for me to walk away, having regained control, having executed justice quietly, and having held true to principle under the most intense pressure of my career. The cliffhanger remained. Would the final internal fallout disrupt the fragile equilibrium, or would the precedent I had set stand unchallenged? The next phase, aftermath, reputation, corporate recalibration, and long-term reflection, was about to unfold. The next morning, the office felt charged, though no one acknowledged it. Vendors called first thing, double-checking invoices, clarifying contacts, uncertain who truly held authority. Emails from board members arrived flagged urgent, requesting updates and explanations. I moved through it all with quiet precision, addressing each matter calmly, methodically, and in the correct order. My desk became a hub of coordination, my presence a subtle reminder that authority had been re-established. Cameron avoided me in hallways, lingering behind doors when possible, glancing at me from across the room, attempting to regain the composure he had lost. Logan approached only when necessary, often with a slightly forced neutrality in his tone. Maya continued her notes, but now with a slight hesitation in her handwriting, reflecting an awareness of the shift she could not ignore. Even junior analysts deferred to me more often, asking questions, seeking guidance, and implicitly acknowledging that the knowledge and experience I carried were not replaceable. I walked into a meeting with a vendor later that afternoon. The manager greeted me cautiously, almost nervously. "Rachel, I just wanted to confirm the new reporting lines." I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. "All channels return through me. Please ensure any discrepancies or delays are flagged immediately." He nodded, relief barely contained, and the subtle hierarchy of authority was reinforced without a word of confrontation. By Thursday, whispers had spread across the floors. Employees who had watched the sidelining and harassment unfold in silence now looked at me differently. The office had an undercurrent of tension mixed with respect. People no longer assumed that senior staff would quietly comply or that coercion was a valid tool. I had set a precedent that reverberated beyond my own department. At home, late that evening, I opened my notebook again. Pages upon pages of documented interactions, emails, phone call transcripts, missteps, miscommunications, subtle threats, and their responses. The sheer weight of preparation and execution pressed on me, but in a quiet, fulfilling way. This was more than just winning a settlement. It was reclaiming a sense of professional integrity, demonstrating that meticulous preparation and careful observation were as powerful as authority itself. The following Monday, a company-wide memo landed in my inbox. Carefully worded, deliberate. All processes under Ms. Mercer's oversight are now fully restored. Previous reassignments have been rescinded effective immediately. Authority and decision-making responsibilities remain with Ms. Mercer until further notice. I read it slowly. Let the weight of every word settle. The shift was now official. Not just in perception, but in formal acknowledgement. The subtle dismantling of assumed power had been completed. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and allowed myself the briefest nod of satisfaction. Yet, change breeds ripple effects. Across the company, executives began recalibrating. Cameron called briefings with other department heads to explain operational misalignments caused by the previous unilateral decisions. Logan's emails became carefully constructed, almost overly formal, reflecting a new respect for the authority they had underestimated. Maya became less detached, more cautious in her observations, adjusting communications to reflect the reality that I now controlled the operational narrative. I observed all of it quietly, stepping in only when necessary. Each minor misstep, each miscommunication, each subtle hesitation on their part was logged. Weeks of silent observation now had the power to influence outcomes without a single aggressive move on my part. My victory had been quiet, precise, and methodical, executed entirely through patience, preparation, and restraint. One Friday, Laura approached me as I filed documents. "Rachel," she said cautiously, "people are still talking about last week. Not the settlement, but the way you handled it. Everyone's impressed. You held your ground without yelling or arguing." I smiled faintly, keeping my expression neutral. Let them speculate. What matters is that the record is accurate and the work continues. That's what control looks like. The days that followed were a careful rhythm of oversight, mentoring, and subtle guidance. I maintained authority, ensured systems functioned correctly, and quietly observed the ongoing recalibration of the office. Employees were more respectful, vendors more cautious, and executives more measured in their communications. The subtle tension lingered, a reminder that power, once assumed without basis, could not be taken lightly. Late one evening, I found myself alone in the office, reviewing logs of interactions during the past month. Every phone call, email, misstatement, and subtle pressure tactic documented meticulously. Every minor victory cataloged. My reflection on the desk glass was faint, but I could see the determination in my eyes. This was not about revenge. It was about ensuring order, respect, and acknowledgement of the experience and knowledge that cannot be easily replaced. That night, Cameron sent a tentative email requesting a brief one-on-one discussion. I read it carefully, noting the phrasing, the subtle apology and structure, the hint of recognition that he had miscalculated. I forwarded it to my attorney and responded neutrally, arranging a time that suited both parties. Every word, every pause, every logistical decision was deliberate. The one-on-one meeting the next morning was tense. Cameron's posture was stiff, his voice controlled, but there was a subtle acknowledgement in his tone. He had misjudged me. "Rachel," he said after polite small talk, "I want to acknowledge your handling of recent negotiations. We underestimated your position and the precision with which you approached it." I remained seated, hands folded on the table, expression neutral. "Thank you. I hope this establishes clarity for future interactions." He nodded, hesitant. "Yes, it does." We want to move forward constructively. Then let's ensure expectations and roles are clearly defined and documented, I said. Silence again, measured, precise. A subtle acknowledgement passed between us. Mutual understanding, though tension remained. Even with authority restored, the office continued to feel the aftershocks. Junior analysts, once brash, now approached with measured questions. Vendors were careful to confirm all communications. Board members requested updates, clearly aware of the weight of the previous week's events. The precedent had been set. Compliance could not be assumed, respect had to be earned, and authority required recognition of experience. At home, I reflected on the transformation. Weeks of observation, patience, and careful documentation had culminated in complete authority, but the work was far from over. There were still consequences to manage, relationships to navigate, and the subtle tension of a company recalibrating to acknowledge long-overlooked institutional knowledge. I made a note to mentor staff, to ensure processes were clear, and to document everything meticulously. This was not only about restoring my authority, but about creating a standard for how knowledge and experience were respected within the company. And yet, a quiet unease remained. Cameron and Logan had experienced a shift in power they had not anticipated. The subtle friction of fear, respect, and recalibration lingered. I knew that further challenges would come, but I had the advantage now: preparation, documentation, patience, and clarity. By Friday, another internal memo circulated, subtly acknowledging the impact of prior mismanagement and emphasizing the need for proper oversight. Staff began to adjust, cautiously but respectfully. Even those who had doubted the exercise of my authority began to recognize its necessity. The office was slowly stabilizing, but I knew better than to assume peace. Power vacuums shift slowly, and those who had been humiliated, overlooked, or undermined would not forget. Their response would emerge subtly, quietly in meetings, in emails, in vendor interactions, and I would be watching, recording, and ready. That night, as I locked my office door, I paused by the window, looking out over the city. The lights glittered faintly in the distance, indifferent to the storm of corporate maneuvering beneath them. My reflection merged with the night, a reminder that preparation, patience, and precise action were the keys to survival, influence, and ultimately, quiet victory. The Monday after the settlement felt different. The office was alive but subdued, as if the previous weeks of tension had left a residue that everyone sensed but no one named aloud. Staff moved with a quiet deliberation, vendors checked in with careful politeness, and the junior analysts who had once assumed authority now deferred to me instinctively. Cameron avoided eye contact. Logan's emails were precise and cautious, and even Maya moved with subtle attentiveness, aware that she could no longer rely on old assumptions. I walked through the halls, letting the silence settle around me. Every interaction was observed, every response catalogued, though I intervened only when necessary. A team meeting began at 10 a.m., and I watched quietly as employees presented updates on projects I had managed quietly from the sidelines. I offered feedback only when needed, keeping my tone neutral but firm, subtly reminding everyone that authority had been restored and that preparation, not aggression, defined leadership. Afterward, I returned to my office and opened my logbook. Every misstep from the previous weeks, every hesitation from executives, every small act of intimidation that had been attempted, all meticulously recorded. This was my reinforcement, a private archive of the lessons, the strategy, and the precision that had allowed me to reclaim my authority. The documents and notes would serve as both protection and guidance for the future, a blueprint for navigating power, patience, and preparation. By midweek, the ripple effects of the settlement became more apparent. Vendors asked fewer questions, but sent confirmations of every action, ensuring no misunderstanding. Project managers adjusted workflows to include my oversight at key decision points. The board began requesting status updates, subtly acknowledging that the office had stabilized under my control. Even Cameron and Logan's interactions with me had shifted. Cameron's tone was cautiously respectful, Logan's emails precise and brief, and both now sought guidance on matters they had previously dismissed. I found satisfaction in the quiet efficiency. This wasn't dramatic or flashy. There were no public accolades, no celebration. It was methodical, precise, and effective, a demonstration that patience and preparation outweighed assumptions of compliance. Power was quiet, authority was earned. One afternoon, Laura approached my desk once again. "Rachel," she said softly, "it's remarkable. People still talk about the negotiations, but in a way that feels reverent. No one expected you to hold your ground so firmly." I smiled faintly, folding a set of reports. "Let them talk," I said. "The work continues. Accuracy, consistency, and observation matter more than noise." By the end of the month, an internal audit revealed the long-term effects of the mismanagement prior to my settlement. Minor errors, previously unnoticed, had propagated throughout the company due to lack of oversight. These findings were documented, carefully presented, and included as part of a report emphasizing the value of experience, preparation, and methodical execution. The board reviewed it quietly, sending notes of acknowledgement and requesting that I continue overseeing operational standards across departments. Despite the victories, the subtle tension remained. Cameron and Logan had learned to respect authority, but also quietly nursed bruised egos. There were moments when I caught Cameron pausing mid-email, Logan hesitating before sending a message, or Maya biting her lip in a meeting, aware that her notes now carried weight far beyond observation. These small micro-expressions were reminders that power shifts leave invisible ripples, some of which persist long after settlements are signed. At home, I reflected on everything. The quiet evenings became a time for review, reflection, and preparation for future challenges. I organized my notes, reviewed the settlement terms one last time, and ensured every interaction had been properly documented. The clarity of process, the meticulous approach, and the patience it required were the lessons I would carry forward. Not just as protection, but as a standard for how authority, respect, and responsibility should be exercised. Then came the unexpected. A company-wide email from HR announced the restructuring of certain departments, referencing the importance of maintaining oversight and institutional knowledge. I smiled faintly, realizing that the influence of my actions extended beyond immediate authority. The precedent I had set, that experience matters, that preparation matters, that silence can wield power, was now part of corporate memory. Yet the final challenge was subtle, personal. Cameron requested a private meeting, ostensibly to discuss ongoing projects. But the tone was different this time, cautious, tentative, tinged with acknowledgement of my ability to hold authority without conflict. "Rachel," he said after polite small talk, "I want to ensure we move forward constructively. Your oversight is critical, and I hope this experience has clarified the importance of experience and preparation in leadership." I nodded, hands folded, calm and measured. "It has," I said. "And I expect that clarity will be reflected in all future operations." He exhaled quietly. "Yes, absolutely." The office had stabilized. Vendors were aligned. Staff had adjusted. Junior analysts deferred appropriately. The subtle power imbalance had been corrected. I had executed authority not through confrontation, but through precision, preparation, and patience. Weeks later, I received a note from a board member expressing appreciation for the way the settlement had been handled. It was concise, professional, but meaningful. "Your meticulous approach and strategic handling of the recent events have reinforced the value of experience and careful preparation in leadership. We appreciate your continued oversight and guidance." I placed the note in my file, reflecting on the journey. The weeks of observation, documentation, and silent strategy had culminated not in spectacle, but in functional, enduring authority. This was the quiet triumph, the validation of experience, patience, and precision. The months that followed brought subtle changes across the company. Processes were refined. Junior staff were mentored under my guidance. Projects were executed with a newfound respect for institutional knowledge. Cameron and Logan, though still present, moved with awareness of the weight carried by those with experience. Maya's observations became more nuanced, and vendors adjusted protocols to ensure accuracy. Even as the office stabilized, I remained vigilant. Quiet observation, careful documentation, and measured intervention had proven their worth, and I understood that authority is never static. The equilibrium must be maintained, relationships carefully managed, and leverage preserved. At home, late one evening, I opened my notebook, reviewing the months of logs, emails, and records. Each entry reminded me of the subtle battles won, the patience exercised, and the silent victories achieved. The story of those weeks was one of precision, strategy, and the quiet exertion of power without drama. I allowed myself a rare smile. The lessons were clear. Preparation outweighs impulse. Observation grants insight, and patience is a weapon more powerful than confrontation. Every interaction had been a step in establishing enduring authority. Every misstep from others had been catalogued. Every decision had been deliberate. And yet, the final reflection remained. The office would continue to test boundaries, executives would continue to misjudge authority, and subtle tension would always persist. But I now had the tools, the experience, and the documentation to navigate any challenge with precision. I leaned back, looking out the office window at the city lights. The streets below moved with indifferent purpose. The office above, once tense, now operated under a quiet, measured respect. My role, restored and affirmed, was secure. I had not only reclaimed authority, but had set a precedent. Preparation, patience, and precision are the ultimate forms of power. A knock at the office door drew me from my reflection. Laura entered, smiling faintly. "They're still talking about you," she said softly. "Even the board. Everyone's noticing how you handled everything." I nodded calmly. "Let them. What matters is that the work is done, the record is accurate, and authority is respected." As she left, I turned back to my notebook, reviewing the last entries. Every email, call, meeting, and observation was meticulously logged. The quiet power I had exercised had transformed the office and reminded everyone that authority is earned, not assumed. And yet, a faint thrill remained in the edges of my mind. The story was over in one sense, the settlement complete, authority restored, but the subtler lessons, the ripple effects of patience, precision, and preparation, would continue to play out. The office would never forget, and neither would I. I closed the notebook, leaving the final pages for reflection and guidance. The room was quiet. The lights dimmed slightly as the sun dipped below the horizon. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the battles that had taken place in glass offices high above. I sat back in my chair and allowed a deep breath. Victory had been quiet, precise, and absolute. The shift in power had been documented, enforced, and observed. Authority was restored, respect earned, and patience validated. And as the night settled over the city, I allowed myself one final thought. Control, once assumed, is fleeting. But when measured, precise, and exercised with preparation, it endures, silently, undeniably, and permanently. I rose from my chair, turning off the desk lamp. The office was empty, the city lights reflected faintly on the windows. Tomorrow, the work would continue, but tonight the story was mine. I left the building, key in hand, feeling the quiet weight of victory. And somewhere, deep inside, a sense of peace settled. Not triumph, not celebration, but certainty. The weeks of struggle, observation, and preparation had paid off. Authority had been reclaimed, precedent set, and respect re-earned. Outside, the city thrummed with life. I walked past streetlights, vendors closing shops, and cars gliding along rain-slick streets. I allowed the silence to wash over me, letting the full impact of what had been achieved settle. And then a notification pinged on my phone. A vendor email flagged urgent. I opened it. A small error had been caught in a previous report, now requiring immediate attention. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. Control is never finished. It is a constant negotiation, a dance of observation, patience, and precision. And I was ready.